We have one more presenter. Kevin is going to talk about the Gold Star veterans that are buried at the cemetery.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Kaegy, and I've had connections both to this church and this cemetery for many, many years. One of my jobs here has been putting out the flags for many years here for our veterans. We have 92 veterans that are buried here at the Campground Cemetery. I was about 15 years old, and Opal and Melvin Clanton were down here mowing the yard. They were mowing the cemetery. Carol, as you remember, your folks did that for many, many years here. And Opal came up the house. She was trying to walk the cemetery and find a couple veterans that they couldn't find. And one of them that we're going to find is one of the men I'm talking about tonight. His name was PFC Lester Kersey. He's one of our Gold Star veterans. He is buried in the very northwest corner of the cemetery. And I remember she and I walked this place many times and couldn't find that. We finally got to the very last row and the very last space, and that's where we found it. So I've been putting up the flags here for about 45 years. Mike helps me with it now. This is truly our family cemetery. Mike and I, our father is buried here, Mom will be here, we'll be buried here, and we literally have I have 15 grandparents buried in Campground Cemetery. So it's two different sets of my family members that are here. The oldest mark stones that are here in Campground Cemetery, or the oldest mark stones, date back to the 1830s. You'll find them right out in the center of this section, just west of the church. There's a number of flags out there on the McAdams family lot. Joseph McAdams, as we mentioned earlier, was one of the Revolutionary War veterans that came here. He had migrated down here from Hillsborough, Illinois. In fact, the first county seat in Montgomery County met in his house. A couple of his boys moved down here to this area, and then he followed them down here as a much older man. He came here in about 1835. The farm that he actually lived on, you all crossed over the edge of it tonight on the way down here. You came down the Dudleyville Road. Just before you cross Beaver Creek, the McAdams farm was just to the west of that. Just north of that is the Jesse McAdams farm. That is the place that I actually live on. In fact, the house I live in was built in 1879 by one of the McAdamses. Another one that surprised me, you mentioned the Harlan place, the William Harlan family in your presentation, Karen. That is the site where Martha's Creamery is. That was the Harlan family home, was right up there in that area, is where that was located. Among the veterans here, as I said, we have 92 different veterans that are buried here at Campground Cemetery. 3 of these are Gold Star veterans. Now, the Gold Star veterans are the veterans that gave their life serving our country abroad. And it's always kind of a special pleasure to mention and honor these men who gave their life sacrifice for us. And here in Campground, we have 3 of them. The first is Corporal Ernest Blacet. Ernest Blacet was the son of Mr. and Mrs. Stephen Blacet. He was a World War I veteran. He was born, his family lived 1 mile southeast of Greenville. He died of pneumonia on January 1st, 1919 in France while a member of the American Expeditionary Forces overseas. Corporal Blacet was a member of the 47th Infantry, the 4th Division, which is now the Army of Occupation and is located near Koblenz on the Rhine River. It is not known whether his body was buried on French or German soil at that time. Corporal Blacet had been married in Atlanta, Georgia on the 4th of July, 5 weeks after he entered into the service, to Miss Ella Kleiner. His middle name was Valley. Ernest Valley Blacet was born on March 7th, 1895 on a farm near Greenville. Besides his widow and parents, he was survived by 2 brothers, Stephen of Orlando, California, and Francis, who was attending Millikan University, and 1 sister, Libbie, who was still at home. He is buried in the west of the road. The road splits the cemetery in half. He's buried in the center of that section. There's a really large red stone in there with flags on the side of it, and that's where PFC Blacet is buried. Our second Gold Star veteran is Lester Kersey. We also drew PFC Lester Kersey was born December 11th, 1919 here in Mills Township, Bond County, Illinois. He was the son of Arthur R. and Evangeline Olmert Kersey. Lester was inducted into the Armed Forces on July 6, 1944. In December, he sailed overseas, and being on water on Christmas Day, he landed in France in early January. Prior to his entrance in the Army, he took a course in Fry's Aircraft School in St. Louis, and then worked in an aircraft factory in California for 2.5 years. Here he met his wife, the farmer Margaret Henderson of Omaha, Nebraska, and they were married 18 months ago, April 9th, 1944. PFC Kersey was killed in action in Germany during World War II. It was March 28, 1945. He was serving with an infantry division of the 3rd Army. He was with Patton's 3rd Army as they were marching across Germany about the end of World War II. On March 28th, they were crossing. It was one of the many divisions that had to cross the Rhine River to actually get into Germany, and there was a lot of German resistance at that. Montgomery's armies had also been crossing the Rhine River, and there was a major offensive at that time to get into Germany, and there was a lot of heavy fighting, and that's when he paid and lost his life. He leaves sisters, Mrs. Nick Schwagel and Doris Kersey. His burial was here in Campground Cemetery. As I mentioned, he's located in the very northwest corner of the cemetery. He is buried with his mother. His mother, Evangeline, passed away a few years after he did. His father, Art Kersey, married a lady named Wilhelmina Zink, and many people do remember Art and Wilhelmina Kersey. They were very active in Greenville and lived in Greenville for many years. PFC Kersey was actually born just north of this church. He was born up on what was originally the Darrell and Lowell Royer farm, was the farm that he would have been born on. Years later, Art and Wilhelmina lived just north of here in Grandma Bruin's farm, which is the farm on the east side of the road. That was that Bruin place was up here. That was the Kerseys before that. Oddly enough, he is let's say one of our Gold Star veterans. His first cousin, Merwin Wise, passed away February 16, 1945. That was his first cousin. They died about a month apart, and it's unusual to have two men both serving in the service that lost their life at the same time. These two guys both knew each other quite well. They were literally born within a few months of each other and passed away within a few months of each other. Merwin Wise is one of our Gold Star veterans. He's buried up in Greenville, the large cemetery up there. Our last one I'll mention this evening was also a World War II veteran. This is PFC, Private First Class June Roland Thomason. He was born June 25th, 1922 in Tamalco Township, Bond County, Illinois. He was the son of George H. and Florence Olmert Thomason. He attended rural schools, attended Carlisle High School, where he graduated with the class of 1940. The school I believe he attended was actually the Palmer School, since he was attached to the Carlisle School District and graduated from Carlisle later on. Palmer School, of course, is our one-room school museum that we have in town to this day. They live down in that area right there. June Thomason entered the Armed Forces on October 20th, 1942. He was first sent to Camp Robinson in Arkansas, later to St. Louis for several weeks training in mechanics, and then to Camp Bowie, Texas, having been assigned to Heavy Maintenance Division that had been in England since January. PFC Thompson was killed in action on France on June 9th, 1944. It sort of is and sort of isn't true. There's a little bit of a question mark of what happened here. He left behind his sisters, his brothers and his brother and sisters. It was his brother Raymond, Mrs. Sarah Seaver, his sister, and Mrs. Lorraine Schaufelberger, who of course was a longtime member of this church, Sue's mother-in-law. The Thompsons were always longtime members of this church here. He was part of a rather remarkable story. We just don't honestly know what that story is yet. And I don't know that we ever will know what really happened to June Thomason. On his stone is marked Lost at Sea. What happened with him, he was part of the expeditionary forces that were based in England that were ready to cross the Normandy Channel and land on D-Day here and start the liberation of Europe. So that's what the stage was that he was sent to England for. He was one of the soldiers who was crossing there. The only real thing that we do know that happened to him, to June Thomason, is the night before the attack was to take place, on the 5th, on June 5th, he was taken from his unit and put on a transport and was never seen again. And we really don't know, nobody in the family knows what it was. The date of June 9th was assigned to it because that's the day that his folks received the telegram saying that he had passed away in the services. And really that was the only communication that the family ever had. June Thomason was taken from his unit on the 5th, put on a transport, never seen again. He was we believe he was part of Operation Fortitude. Operation Fortitude was a rather mind-boggling hoax that was carried on by the British and Canadian and United States armies about the D-Day invasion. What they were doing is they were using all the information they could and fake radio broadcasts to help convince the Germans that the main attack was actually going to come at Calais, France, which is only 30 miles across the English Channel. It's about 100 miles north of Normandy. They were sending all kinds of fake messages and so forth to that effect. And it basically convinced Hitler that this was going to happen. So Hitler had several of his largest armies based at Calais rather than on the Normandy beaches. Now, there was a lot of heavy fighting at the Normandy beaches, of course, on D-Day on June 6, 1944, when this all happened. But the main part of it did not. The main part of the German army was actually held back in Calais, France. We do know that several of these hoaxes did actually work from that standpoint. We don't know if he was taken from that effort, but far one of those things that was going on to help fool things. What was going on with the hoax? They used decoys like rubber tanks, canvas ships, plywood fake aircraft on the ground all along the southeast coast of England to help convince the German army that the attack was going to take place 100 miles north of where it did. There was also paratroopers where they actually made dummies of paratroopers and sent airplanes over Calais, and they had a large paratroop mission dropped out where dummies were dropped over Calais, so the German army thought some of the army was dropping in at that time. The decoy army was actually led by General George Patton, supposedly. That was the way that all the news reports were written up so that Hitler would believe that. On the 5th, we do know that mine destroyers were sent out to England. Mine destroyers were sent out to help sweep the English Channel, to sweep channels so that the transports could start shipping everybody over on the 6th. The transport he was on could have been hit by a German mine, or they could have hit a German mine, as did several that day. It could have been sunk due to the rough seas that day that took place, and they could have had trouble and tried to turn back, but because of the secrecy of the mission and the element of surprise, there was no radio contact whatsoever. He could have been shot down by friendly fire if the boat tried to turn around and come back. We just simply don't know what happened to June Thomason. What we do know is that on his tombstone it is marked June 9th, and it just simply says lost at sea. But that's the story behind him. He is one of the many, many men that paid their sacrifice that day because of the D-Day landings that took place. The telegram received with their family, as I mentioned, did come on June 9th. Now, just a couple other tidbits of information about the campground cemetery that I have for you. Some unusual names that we have buried out here in the cemetery. We've got a stone out here marked for a man named Elijah Easter. Elijah Easter is buried in the southeast corner of the west side of the cemetery. In the center part of the old cemetery here, we have David Bean Blossom. I've always thought that was an unusual name. There are bean blossoms over around Pleasant Mound. That's kind of, like I said, that's an unusual one. There's a cast iron lamp here in this part of the cemetery. You walk straight west of the church, just south a little bit, you'll find a cast iron lamp on a child's grave down here in the center of the old part of the cemetery. Over on the southwest corner of the cemetery, there's a gentleman buried down there named Fred Plant. He was a longtime resident of the Dudleyville neighborhood. He was one of the grave diggers here at this cemetery for over 50 years and worked here for many, many years doing that. He's buried over near Orland, Melvin Platinum, where they're located. We had one man, a World War II veteran, Ed Goodson, was buried here. The thing I remember about him, he used to drive around in a truck in the 1960s. I'm dating myself on these things. He drove around an old pickup truck. He was an exterminator, and he had a sign on the side of the truck that said what did he call it? The death specialist. I believe that's what he called himself. Ed Goodson, the death specialist. He was an exterminator. We have a man buried out here as one of our veterans named Dr. James Nikita, which is a Japanese name. He was married to one of the Critchfield girls. This was a farm just south of where Margaret's Creamery was, where the Critchfields lived. Captain U.B. Harris is also buried here in the old part of the cemetery. When I talk about our Civil War veterans in Bond County, Colonel Reed was the man who was in charge of most of the troops from the Bond County area. Captain U.B. Harris ran the Wisetown General Store, and he was in charge of Company F of the 130th Infantry, which was the southern unit that was down here. Also buried in the cemetery out here, just straight west of the church, Lucy Danielson is a woman that was in the Women's Air Corps during World War II. That's unusual. We don't have a lot of lady veterans that are buried out here in this. We don't have another one in a campground cemetery, not too many in Bond County, period. Lucy Danielson is one of the Waxons out there. Just west of the church, this little group of stones just to the west, there's a rather large stone out here for Shadrach Bond. He was, I believe, a great-grandson of Governor Shadrach Bond, and he was a descendant that ended up living in this area. On the southwest corner of the cemetery, in the new parts of the graves that are out there, Lester Harnicher, longtime leader of the Bond County Historical Society, was buried there. We have several good Comet friends that are buried out here in Campground Cemetery. Lester Harnicher is here. Jim Schaufelberger is out here, and Joyce Gerkes is out here. I remember Joyce from being at many, many of our sporting events. So we have quite a few Comet fans that are laid to rest out here in our cemetery. We do have one unusually marked stone that is located up here. I won't mention the family name, but if you want to find it, you'll have to find it yourself. It is the third row back on the very north side of the cemetery. When you go back in here, we do actually have a stone here in Campground Cemetery, and it says, "Take me to Hooters." That is, you will not find that anywhere in Bond County that I've ever found. In fact, I remember seeing that and I thought, did I really see that? And then it was several years later, I called Sue up and I said, "Sue, I'm thinking there's a stone out here that says, 'Take me to Hooters.'" She says, "Yes, there is. I can tell you the whole story." So I'll let Sue tell you the story. Where's Sue at? Is Sue around here somewhere? Yeah, Sue's right there. She can fill you in the story. The man is not buried there yet. This is just his preparation. So he is not buried. He is not buried there yet. But he will be, and he will have an interesting epitaph. So with that, I'll bring my little bit to a close this evening. I did bring a couple things to show and tell for pictures up here, and whenever we break loose, you can take a look at some of this. For years and years, for mowing the cemetery and taking care of the cemetery here, we did large family picnics. This is part of the reason we were so, we all get along so well with each other down here. Generations of our families have worked together to help put on these many picnics. This was from the last picnic. Dad was one of the guys that would go down and sell 50-cent tickets for people to get their name put on here. So this is a record of all the businesses practically in Greenville around the square in 1974. It says 73, but it's actually 74 is when this is dated to. But this was the last time we actually had to do that. There was a man named Walter Ruther, left them a little bit of money, and they were able to put that in the bank on interest, and they now use those interest payments to help pay for the mowing of the cemetery. I also have a few pictures of the church and so forth here. Brother Fred and Elaine Berghoff here. Elaine has one of her uncles is buried out here on the west side of the cemetery. He also is a World War I veteran. He was one of the men who were gassed and came home. They're not considered our honor roll veterans that they probably should be, but he's one of them that's buried over there in that area. Also, Brother Tom Huffman's on a couple of the pictures in here, so you'll have to come up and there's Christians right there. You got to come. Your dad's a couple of pictures up here. When he was dedicating the building in the front of the church on here, of course, my grandma Kaegy was a member of this church actively for about 55 years or so when she came here. So I'll let you sit there.